Next up is Rick Harnish, who's our Director of WISP Markets, who's going to present CBRS. I'm staring here at Steve Curran, the WISP attorney, because the content will look remarkably familiar to you, Steve, considering it's generated quite a bit from Steve, who does a lot of our roadshows, and he does some Telluride roadshows. We both use him because he's the best. So maybe he'll answer a question or two.
So just to recap on this morning, you know, a month or so ago I wrote a buy tip and posted it on our website called Every DB Counts. And I have to say, just about everything you guys have heard this morning, whether it's antenna down tilt, antenna azimuth, low PIM cables, quality antennas, good weatherproofing, you can see how important that is that every DB counts. So, you know, the cellular operators have learned a lot over the years, and they got expert testers that are doing all this work. We ought to learn something from them, and especially with LTE, because really every DB counts. You know, I had an operator email me last week, and he was really seemed like he was kind of disappointed in the email that it couldn't adjust the CPE power all the way up. And with my years of experience, I've often visited and consulted with operators that I go to their location and the CPEs, the Wi-Fi CPEs, were turned all the way up. And I just want to make sure that you guys understand that the lower you can run the power on your CPEs, the more bandwidth you're going to get, and the less interference you're going to cause for your network and your competitors. So automatic transmit power control is what we have. That doesn't allow you to change the power on the CPEs. We do it for you. But that's a good thing. It prevents you guys from making really bad mistakes by turning your CPEs all the way up. So if you are doing that on your Wi-Fi network, turn them down to where you can really to the lowest threshold you can and still get good performance, because you're only causing yourself problems. So you can really get, and Ken's slides with the dishes that he put on, you could see by putting that dish on and getting more gain on the antenna, that allowed the eNode B to lower the power on the CPE and still achieve good modulation and ultimately more bandwidth to your customers. This is the point that I wanted to make after listening to everything this morning. Okay, I put some slides together on CBRS preparation strategies. Is coming?
You might be working off two mics.
Okay. Am I echoing?
Turn it off the other one.
So it's coming. We don't know when. Hopefully this fall, maybe first quarter 2018. But we need to be prepared, and you guys as operators need to develop a strategy for being prepared.
Yeah,
am I not talking loud enough, sir? I know I don't talk very loud at all, but.
No, you're fine. But considering the first NPRM on this was issued in December 2012, when I say it's finally right on top of us, it's pretty much right on top of us. So this is as important as any other content today, even though this isn't technical content.
My switcher's not working.
Oh, it's unplugged. That's why. First rule of tech support, Rick.
Blame that on KP?
Usually you blame it on the cable guy or the wireless guy.
Oh, don't walk away too fast. Try it the old manual way. I can't even get that to work. All right. So this first couple slides, thanks to Steve Curran, most of them come from his presentation. CBS Tiers, you got your incumbent access. Navy radar stations, fixed satellite earth stations. Those guys are going to be, they're not going to accept any interference from anybody in CBRS. They're going to get the top priority. If they're in the area, they are going to operate on those frequencies, so just understand that. In a lot of areas of the country, you don't have FSS, and you don't have Navy radar, so pretty much the whole band's going to be opened up. Second tier is priority access licenses. So there's going to be an auction this fall for priority access licenses. They're 10 megahertz slices of spectrum. They will float in the spectrum. So if one of the incumbent users enters your area, those PAL licenses have to be able to float to another frequency so that you're not interfering with the incumbent users.
Yeah, really the real reason they float is the naval radar is in the bottom side of the band, right? But the DoD isn't going to tell you exactly what frequency that radar is going to fire at. So should it fire, it could occur anywhere on that band. So because of that, the electronic sensing capability and everything else has to be able to realize that, and the SCS will move you to, some portion of the band that's not being used. So that's why when you get your PALs, they just can't be fixed. They do float, but for all intents and purposes, for you, it's protected band no matter where it moves.
So these are sold by census tract in 10 megahertz slices, like I said. Census tracts can be very small sections of land, or they can be very big out in the western United States. There's 77,000 census tracts in the United States. There's 70 megahertz that's going to be dedicated to PAL licenses. In 10 megahertz slices, that's 7 licenses per census tract. That's almost 500,000 licenses that are going to be sold. Very complex auction. Steve, do you have any update on where that auction process is at this point?
There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Let's do the hand mic.
So there are a lot of things, I don't know if this is in your slide deck or not, but there are a lot of things that need to happen before we have the auctions. Namely, if you are a 365 licensee, you'll have an opportunity to register your locations, your grandfathered locations in a new database. So that has to happen, and there's going to be a public notice that'll give you an opportunity to do that. There's a process for earth stations to register in the spectrum access system. That has to happen. We have to have equipment certified to communicate with the spectrum access system, and we have to have the SAS and the ESC, the environmental sensing capability, set up and approved by the FCC, and have SAS administrators approved by the FCC. And then the last one is we have to have auction rules. And the way the FCC will do that is they will put out a public notice saying, what should our auction rules look like? Should it be one round? Should there be bidding credits for women or small businesses? Not likely with 74,000 times 7 licenses to auction off. It will be multiple round. Will it be one round? What's the reserve price? So that's usually about a 6-month process, and then somebody actually has to build the auction system to make it work. It's not like everybody shows up in a ballroom like one of the very first auctions, and you have people running around trying to generate bids with little head nods or fingers in the air. So we're going to have GAA, the General Authorized Access, the last tier, probably within the next 12 months, maybe sooner, maybe by the end of this year. I think 2018 is what I've been saying is for the PAL auctions. I know that's a long answer, but I wanted to give some of the background because I'm not sure if you have a slide on it.
So we'll have GAA before the auction, and after the auction, obviously GAA would operate across the whole band.
Yeah, anywhere where there
And
is not a
once the
PAL.
auction takes place, GAA would lose some of that spectrum to PAL license.
Only when the PALs are on. Remember, there's an
Yes.
opportunistic use it or share
Once they
it,
deploy the equipment.
Yeah.
or before they, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, wherever there's not a PAL, it's GAA. Even if there's a PAL and it's not active, it's GAA, because the SES knows when the licensee comes online, but until that point, it's all general authorized access.
Before I go on, any questions so far? I know this is somewhat complex.
No,
And
let's
I'm just giving a very quick overview. Steve's presentation is so much better than mine.
That's all right. Let's jump. But it did come back.
Yeah, so Rick, one other thing is, if it's not clear, there's two flavors of general authorized access. There's the spectrum set aside that you're going to talk about here of 80 megahertz, and then there's the opportunistic use, which is on the other 70 megahertz when and where the PALs are not in use.
Yeah, I kind of missed the general authorized access, but that's 80 megahertz. So a total of 150 megahertz in the CBRS spectrum, 70 of it going to PAL licenses, 80 megahertz of it going to GAA. And obviously, if a PAL is not being used, that adds on to the GAA spectrum.
Yeah, so you can see up here in the existing NN band, 365 to 37, all that spectrum will fall under GAA rules. So there'll be no PALs in there. So in terms of how your operations are currently, unless you have registered sites pre-April 17, 2015, not much happens really to those sites. You don't have to do any kind of changes or anything else. They're just as legal then as they are now. They just fall under a different set of rules, Part 96 versus Part 90. And they just become GAA. And then the ones that you've pre-registered sites, your licenses don't get protection, your sites get protection. So any sites you've had registered prior to April 17, 2015, you become like an AT&T for that particular site until April 17, 2020, when your protection ends. And then you just operate just like you are normally now anyway. So.
Very few operators, I mean, there's a lot of operators that registered sites, their base station equipment. Very few operators registered their CPEs. If you had registered your CPEs, your grandfather protection area would have been a lot bigger than what it is if just doing a site. Brian?
2015.
2015.
Did I say 17? Yeah, I meant 2015. Thank you.
Yeah, so that pretty much covers everything I just said, I think.
Yep.
So 30 megahertz of the bottom 100 megahertz is still dedicated to GAA.
Even if every PAL is taken.
Yes. I covered the census tract. 10 megahertz channels assigned dynamically. Again, they have to have the ability to float. If you're in rural areas of the United States, they probably aren't going to move them very often, if ever, but they do have to have that ability. And the SAS database will control all that.
Yeah, the two important points being a 40 megahertz cap. So no single entity can come in and get more than 4 PALs. I was asked a question earlier by an operator that said, we actually have 2 companies. Well, actually, the FCC is supposedly going to be pretty tight with that. You can have 4 licenses regardless of what name that company is operating under. Is that correct, Steve? It's supposed to be correct. Yeah, well, I'm sure there'll be people that work their way around that, but that's the limit. So even if Verizon came up in an urban area and got 4 of them, there's still some left unless T-Mobile or someone. But in rural areas, the likelihood that the big guys are going to come in and gobble all this stuff up is really, I think, slim to none anyway. Well, that's why they have this cap. And that was also the situation with, kind of the E block and 700 megahertz. All the rural guys were excited, then Verizon came up and got it all. But that's one of the things that's very unique with this band. You have both all the rural fixed guys and you have all the mobile big carriers. They all want this band, but really for non-competing reasons. This is one of the reasons there's so much mass behind this. Because the big guys want it to cellular offload in urban corridors, in building, wherever their precious billion-dollar spectrum is getting crushed by streaming. In the very rural areas, that's not happening to them. So they're not going to be spending a lot of complex OpEx and CapEx to maybe acquire licenses in the super rural areas, at least not initially, I wouldn't think. But in the urban areas, yeah, I think you're going to see them picking up PAL licenses pretty aggressively.
So if I may, the third to the bottom bullet is really important. It may look kind of counterintuitive that the FCC is not imposing any build-out requirements, but if you think about it, when you couple that with use it or share it, it's actually a good thing. So people won't be throwing up stuff at the 11th hour to meet some service, lame, and there are a lot of lame substantial service requirements at the FCC. So instead they won't be putting up anything because there's no regulatory incentive for them to do so, which means that if they're still sitting on it and not using it because they don't have to, creates more opportunistic use.
Bless you. So, yeah, for the point being, even if they do go out and go into, Diller, Nebraska, and they buy 4 licenses, there to feed the corn or whatever they want to do with it, unless those things are fired up, you get to use those, right? So it's not like 2.5 where they can just kind of warehouse the spectrum. It's a totally different arrangement.
Steve, would you touch on the no renewal right on the 3-year license term?
Sure. The mobile wireless guys love to have these long-term licenses of 10 years that have a renewal expectancy based on, again, meeting certain service obligations. And the FCC they wanted to get away from this command and control licensing process and licensing approach. So they said, we're going to have 3-year licenses, and in the first auction, you can buy 6 years, and you will always be able to have a 3-year tail on your licenses, as I understand it. So that means that it still becomes some sort of an investable and some sort of a tradable license. But the idea is that it's an anti-warehousing. That, together with the no build-out requirements, is going to hopefully present a lot of the spectrum warehousing we've seen in the 2.5 gigahertz band, as somebody said, and some of the other bands. And certainly, this is a way to, typically stuff is built out in the urban cores, and you're lucky if you're getting, 4G in a lot of rural areas right now on your mobile network. So this is an effort to try to, let other people do what the Verizons and the AT&Ts and the Sprints and the T-Mobiles are not doing, which is building out in areas that they would not find especially attractive to them, but you guys in this room might find very attractive.
So that last bullet point, it's only going to be, PAL licenses are only going to be available in a given census tract if somebody applies for them, applies to take part in the auction. I'm going to segue on that point to the next slide. So that's actually a map in western Indiana. I think Joink would probably recognize that. That's the census tracts in, I think, Sullivan County, Indiana. You can identify census tracts with that URL at the top. So right now, these are strategies I want you guys to start paying attention to and developing. Start identifying your present and future census tract areas. You probably do so for the 477 today, but start a spreadsheet or whatever, discuss with your owners and your staff personnel what census tracts you guys want to pay attention to, and develop that list. And talked about whether you're going to, participate in the PAL auction in the first place. Rank the census tracts in order of importance. Yeah. I mean, it's all part of developing your strategy. You could look at it and say, if nobody applies for a PAL license, then it's going to go to GAA. I can use it for free. Or you can look at it as, if nobody else is going to do it, I ought to be able to bid on those very cheap and get them. I don't know that there's a low price at this point, and I don't know whether that rule has even been set.
No, there's no reserve price, but you can do a little back of the envelope math and say if there's 4,000 people in a given census tract and there's 10 megahertz, and figure what is, for a 10 megahertz license, what is the megahertz per pop value. If you look at the broadcast incentive auction, what was it, $1.25 a megahertz pop? So if you do the math and maybe add in some, subtract or add based on the demographics or based on the fact that it's less spectrum, then you can probably get a at least a starting point, but we don't know what the reserve price is going to be, and we don't know, obviously, how intensive the bidding may be in a market-by-market basis.
Yeah, the truth is we don't know that answer yet, Casey, right? So this is something I've actually talked internally with Rick. There's someone that we may contract to do, who's kind of an expert, at least on 2.5, to maybe do some analysis and try to figure out what kind of some baseline is. I mean, this is a whole different animal for everyone, right? You've got 77 or 74,000 census tracts, 7 potential licenses per. Very different than anything this FCC's ever done. You know, usually you're you know, it's based on MSAs or BTAs or, you know, whatever. So this is really the smallest, well, population measurement and even geographic measurement I think they've ever done an auction process. So I keep on telling myself I'm pretty sure there'll be certain rural areas that may be a couple $100 even for a license. So really I think we do need to do a little bit of work and maybe write a white paper on it or something. You know, if I had the internal resources and bandwidth, I'd develop a practice and sell that as a service to you. But, or waive the service fee for certain commitments. But we will do some work on that at some point this year, probably in Q3, try to figure some of that out, because we need to know that answer too.
Yeah, Steve gave a valuation of a cell frequency, I think. That's not going to happen in this. These are 3-year licenses. You can get up to 6 years the first time. They're really small areas, low density in rural areas.
And there's a penalty for less power, which would devalue the price per pop a little bit, because it's not like 2.5 where you've got 10 watts you can leverage.
Yeah, so the 2.5 licenses, those price ranges are 4 cents to 25 cents per megahertz pop. And the 25 cents comes in very high density areas like Miami. In rural areas, sometimes you could even pick them up for less than 4 cents per megahertz pop.
But you really want to throw yourself for a loop? This whole process may actually lower the value of 2.5 licenses, right? Because everyone's doing streaming. How many slices of 2.5 do you need to be able to offer the kind of bandwidth that you guys need to sell today? You need to have a lot. So I know some license holders I've talked to are really concerned about that, the fact they better have a lot of bandwidth in 2.5 that they paid a lot of money for. But guess what? The WISPs are going to come in with CBRS, have higher power than WISPs have ever had before, and be able to sell packages that directly compete with 2.5 rural operators, and they may kick their butts. So this actually 2.5 may go down as maybe some of the valuation of 3.5 goes up. So really don't know. It's a lot of moving parts here.
I totally agree. I think 2.5's really kind of been propped up by Clearwire bid for licenses years ago. And you know, just the band plan of 2.5, it's really not friendly.
Yeah, my expectation of 2.5, you'll start seeing that spectrum migrate more towards Internet of Things use and less towards people. That's my guess. But Aaron?
Yes, sir.
Is there any word on any potential changes to this, given the new administration that's in office with new regulation?
If you can accurately predict anything that Don might do, then a lot of money to be made there, my friend. I don't know if anyone can do that. But you know, Chairman Pai is in there. He is a friend of this industry. His parents are connected by a WISP in EBS BRS bands. So he's been to a lot of WISP events. Many of us have met him. Many of us know him on first name basis. So I know you're itching to say something. Go for it.
So a couple of plugs. First, this will be the subject of discussion in other panels. So come to the WISPA Legislative and Regulatory panel tomorrow afternoon. We're also doing a session on open internet and privacy rules called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, ? There's also one on Connect America Fund, and we haven't even talked about the Spectrum CAF connection. And then on Thursday afternoon, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into some of the Spectrum issues. So I want to make sure I got that shameless plug in. But to answer the question, there isn't any indication that this particular chairman wants to change the rules. I think changes would come if WinForum, the Wireless Innovation Forum that is developing the protocols and the rules and the policies for the SAS, reach an impasse and the FCC has to step in. So sometimes the fear of regulation and the fear of government intervention is a very good motivator. So let's hope that they can continue to do their good work.
Yeah, the process is so far along, I hope not, so. All right, please continue.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm even going to cover this for the sake of time. We've already talked about opportunistic use, if there's no PALs in use.
Yeah, and I talk a little bit about CBRS under the discussion of small cell as well, because in CBRS you have two categories. You've got category A and category B. Category B is the higher power stuff. Then there's category A, which is actually slots in really nicely with small cell, so I can talk to some of that then. A lot of people I continue to talk to, especially new people that I've never really met before, that are holding off on 365 even though they have a license because they're afraid of this band. I don't think you need to be afraid of it. I think quite the opposite. I think there's no net negative to what's happening here. Yep, I'll get you the question, but I think this band explodes this industry like we've never seen before, and I've been at this a long time. My predictions are usually spot on. That's one of the few things I do really well, but I'm telling you, just when people started making purpose-built 900 megahertz stuff, which is 26 megahertz of noisy as heck spectrum, when WISP vendors started making purpose-built 900, within a couple years, there was already over $100 million just in WISP gear sold in 900. 100 new megahertz below existing 365. Stone cold quiet, low noise floor. Harmonized with almost the rest of the world. So big vendors will be coming into this with all kinds of UEs and all kinds of devices. LTE hitting at the same time. 100 megahertz versus 26. Quiet versus noisy. LTE versus no LTE. In other words, standards versus proprietary. Even if you just applied the same math where that 26 megahertz generated over 100 million in just WISP gear within a few years, I would be shocked within 5 years after this comes online, we're not talking billions of dollars and well over $1 billion just in WISP gear. That's not talking about parking meters, small cell, every other thing that's going to be leveraging this band. Just think you know, every city out there pays AT&T or Verizon to connect stuff out there in their counties. That's money out of their pockets. That's a bill they can't control because every month they got to connect something else. Traffic sign, Amber Alert Board, parking meter, water sensor, whatever it is.
AT&T has over 2 billion Internet of Things online right now.
Thank you. They have big programs, AT&T and Verizon, based on all this stuff. Here comes this opportunity where every one of those entities has the ability to build their own private LTE network and operate in a protected manner, just like an AT&T and a Verizon.
Including you.
Including you. Who else has been chomping at the bit for this for 1 million years? Utilities. Unlike Canada, they don't have their own special band here. Critical infrastructure. They've been bouncing around with all kinds of proprietary crap for years. I'm telling you guys, this band is going to be massive. And the best people on the planet, or at least in the country, to leverage this band are you guys, but you've got to understand it, and you've got to understand the potential. It's a big, 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 big deal. You know, so you should be talking to all your city managers, anyone over there that you think might be able to benefit from a private network. Maybe you have them buy the PALs and you operate the network or whatever the agreement is. There's a lot of creativity here to be had. So you should all be coming up, every single one of you in here, whether you use my gear or someone else's gear, you should be coming up with a CBRS strategy of some sort.
Let me just pile on a little bit with a couple of random thoughts.
By
First,
God, go ahead.
First, It says there in the fourth bullet, deploy now. Please do not deploy now, because if you deploy now in 3550 to
No.
3650.
That's in NN spectrum.
I know. I'm coming back to that. I just don't want people to be confused. You will suffer the wrath of the FCC's Enforcement Bureau, and they will begin to look at us as not very good stewards of the band. So if you're talking about something that could change the regulatory posture, it's people doing stuff they shouldn't do.
Never happens in this space, so not a problem.
No. Okay. So,
So that's in 365 to 37, don't,
Yeah, 365 to 37. You know, one of the things the FCC did when they
you
put
have to
these
have a
rules in
license to
place.
do that.
When they put these rules in place was they allowed you guys to continue to register locations, which turned out to be, for the last 3 years, the best thing that's ever happened to this industry, because it has brought about companies like Baicells into the ecosystem, actually built an ecosystem where you now have this glide path to get into the lower band. And one other thing, on Wednesday we have a keynote that is called Sometimes You're the Fly and Sometimes You're the Windshield. And to Patrick's statement, make sure you're the fly. Right? The fly or the windshield. Make sure you're the ones who are out there leading the charge, not
Make
the
sure
ones who are
you're in
getting
the car,
smashed.
driving the car,
Car.
that whose windshield hits the fly.
There you go. Squirt, squirt.
Well, these are just some additional strategies you might think about. And some of these are just my theory, but GAA spectrum will probably be used in high-density areas, urban areas, to deploy small cells, rather than bidding on PALs and having to do that every 3 years. I think initially, a lot of those companies that start deploying small cells will depend on GAA. I may be totally off base there, but that's just my feeling. Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a four-man approach to a PAL GAA bid, because I'm on an American Power site, and as long as I don't change a couple of the things about people that I deploy, 3650 to 3700 is mine, basically, as long as the
Well, not necessarily. When CBRS comes out, if you turn your radios off or something for a 7-day period, somebody else can come in and start using that. Once you're in the database,
well, I mean, even on my tower, American Power won't put anyone else
He's talking about tower lease.
okay.
Yeah.
box that frequency spectrum in for me.
Yeah, for sure there's ways around that to try to, convince the property owners, but, yeah. Any event, there's a huge amount of stuff, and I'll go over some of the other stuff that should blow your mind. In other words, small cell under CBRS is going to start eating Wi-Fi's lunch. It's going to take over a lot of Wi-Fi. Question, I'm sorry, yes, sir.
So now that, Patrick, now that you have all the troops rallied and everything, Steve kind of added his little bit. If you're a WISP that doesn't have a 365 license now, this is the question I get asked all the time. Do I go out and, find one that I can buy, or do I wait? Opinions?
Get it now. That's my opinion. Get it now. Deploy now.
But consult with us and don't pay some stupid amount for it. I've heard some people trying to charge $10,000 or whatever.
Most CBRS licenses I've helped broker have gone in the $1,000 price range. I've had one that went as high as $5,000, $6,000, but yeah, don't get ridiculous. They're out there. Oh, you're going to have about $1,000 in the license, give or take 1,000. Well, you're not going to get it for zero, but you're going to have some legal costs to do the transfer paperwork unless you fill out Form 603 by yourself. Download 603 and you might get scared to death because it's a long form. Not that much information that has to be filled in, but I know Tim, you did your own, didn't you? Yeah.
And Learman Center can help you
This
do
is
this
competition
stuff.
for me, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I know.
You can sue Tim if things go south, okay?
Exactly. Yeah, Steve does this as well, obviously.
Question.
Yeah, real quick question. Steve, you actually sent out a couple years ago, maybe now, 18 months or so, a list from the FCC of rural sites that could run at a higher output power, I think, on the 365 band. Is that, am I
Yes.
remembering that right?
Yeah.
And can you explain
It's
what that is?
47, I want to say 47 dBm per 10 megahertz is
EIRP.
EIRP, which is what, 11 11 dB.
I'm pointing at you, Cameron. What's it translate into decibel?
I think it was 36 and 365 and 47. So you do get a bit of a bump. That's what engineers have told me. They're expressed differently. 365, it's based on how many per megahertz, and it's
Yeah.
expressed differently.
And it's an important thought. So there, I think a lot of rural markets, you'll be able to leverage up to 47 dB EIRP, and if you're using 20 dBm equipment, it's going to be awfully hard pressed, even if that equipment will cover that new band to leverage that power.
Right, your CPE is 23, so, think about what you have to be able to talk back to your CBSD, so.
Yeah. CBSDs being, right. Just, that's jargon, Citizens
Access points.
Broadband Radio Device.
Got a question over here.
Yes, sir.
I'll speak loud. And not being fully familiar with exactly how these auctions take place, every 3 years, we're going to be trying to bid for our spectrum again?
The first auction, you can get up to 6 years. Now, I assume that doubles the price, Steve. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but if they bid $100 for the license, they're going to have to pay $200 to get 6 years. We
Is it
don't
a
Be
new
whatever.
auction every 3 years? How does it work?
It's going to be an auction 3 years, and at the first one, you can buy 3 years. And then I guess there will be an auction maybe in year 4 or 5 for the 3 years that begin in year 7, so that you're not always at the
Which-
end of your term trying to figure out
So
what to do.
that's one of the things that goes into deciding how this auction's going to be. In the original NPRM, way back in 2012, the phrase, I believe, was that they talked about an eBay-like auction process, something very simple, online. Google wants to build it. So,
Cantor Fitzgerald wanted to build it, and they wanted it to be mandatory that you use their
Oh, of course they
secondary
did.
market access system, which wasn't going to happen.
so I'm sure they'll figure out a way where it's not terribly onerous.
But we're doing this every 3 years with a chance of it being, us being outbid and then unable to use the equipment at that point?
No, because you'd still, then worst
Still have
case, you'd fall
GAA.
under GAA, and it would be opportunistic use.
But
Right.
in a way, should put downward pressure because the big guys probably aren't going to be too interested in 3-year licenses.
Yeah.
Unless one heck of an API is built for them to automate their bidding process. Which will probably be done anyway, but
Right.